Actually, I have a very simple question. If a mayor comes to you and asks you to make its city attractive, how would you answer?
I think I would tell him to keep the public domain on grade and not create expressways and elevated platforms and structural esplanades, but actually stay on the ground and use the natural geography as the base for construction. And I would tell them to figure out, like Europe has in most cases, but not many other countries, to keep have public transportation dominate the way people move within the city. I think my colleague next to me mentioned Curitiba. 80% of the public in Curitiba uses public transportation. Only 20% uses private means of moving around.
Manuelle, how would you answer to this question?
I would be inspired by the European cities, so I would like to say to keep the density, not to elongate too much a city in terms of surface. So keep a sort of familiar density, which is very important for us because it's a sort of warmness feeling. And because I am from Paris, I would like to say that often we have a huge heritage, but we have to absolutely to mix it with modern architecture. So we have sometimes to demolish. I mean, we have to find bracing spaces to innovate and to experiment new shapes of architecture. So we have to keep the old character of our beautiful European cities, but we have absolutely to mix it with contemporary architecture, even in the centers.
Djamel, in your experience, I mean, Manuelle is speaking about Grand Paris, and in your experience of Grand Paris, Greater Paris, well, okay, Paris is very attractive for sure, but how would you make the suburb attractive?
I think the question is recycling. How can we recycle the cities? I think the first answer is recycling. And for me, the second is how to make a link between large scale, strategic scale, and very small scale. Because I think the future of the city is, I think, in this space, in this articulation between project, small project, specific project, and strategic vision. So I think I try to make a feedback between these two levels.
Daniel, you have worked on the European cities. You've worked very much on experimental quest research, a lot on Milano, Berlin, London, etc. And now you're in Asia, in Middle East. How to help those cities to grow in a normal way, I would say?
It's a very complex question, but I think the simple answer to it, you have to think out of the box. One has to use one's imagination. We cannot just afford to modify the past. We need a radical strategy that doesn't only confirm the things we already know and believe in. So we need also to develop a kind of strategy of risks. And I know there are a lot of people here who deal with risks. And architecture is very averse to risks. It's, you can take a risk in gambling, or you can take a risk in, crossing a street, but you don't take a risk in investment. But I think, in my experience, as limited as it is those companies, those people, those cities who have taken a big idea. They didn't shy away from transformation that has no precedent in some way. And even with a small building sometimes. Look, the Jewish Museum in Berlin, it took 12 years, 13 years to build. So I think one has to be a believer, and it's not a short-range discourse. It's a marathon, and you have to be prepared, I think, for a very long-range discourse, a long-range commitment. I think cities are more and more, realizing that they have to compete on other levels than just nice buildings. They have to compete on the vision of the future, which is always something that has to do with a dream. And I'm a believer that the dreams come true if you are not going to wake up just to the cynicism that is so much part of our overly rational minds.
Thank you. Hani, you're working in growing cities, expanding cities. How to help them to grow in a decent manner?
In terms of recommendations to mayors or to people involved at that level, I think out of the box was going to come out of my mouth, but Danny got it's absolutely true to think out of the box. But I think when you say out of the box, also to consider sort of programs that aren't necessarily typical. I mean, the whole notion of retail and residential and office, sort of multi-use complexes and so on, has kind of run its course. I think now you have to start to really think about what appeals to not only this generation but future generations in terms of city space. What in fact appeals to people who are acclimated to Twitter, who in fact exist in an entirely different kind of structural and social sphere. And I think that part of that, and the answer I would always say, or part of the, as I sort of made the medical analogy in my talk, is to think about culture. I think culture, whether it's opera houses, theaters, museums, and all the kind of normal things we think about, but in the case of Abu Dhabi for us, Formula One was a cultural kind of insertion, let's say. And I think also that's something that has to be part of that out-of-the-box thinking. Because what it's doing is not just bringing you the potential for beautiful architecture and interesting cities, it's bringing the people to a place that they can actually be enthralled by, want to go to, want to be part of, and not really just yet another kind of, sort of large retail complex or another, sort of shopping experience or something like that. It has to involve that. So I think it requires vision. And I've always said this, and luckily I don't think any of my clients are here, so they're not going to feel patronized, but I've always said that it's the vision of the clients that drives our vision as architects. If a client has vision, even to begin a sentence and let us complete it, it really helps, and I think that's part of it. Thank you.
Matthias, you're very much helping us or your clients or the mayors that you're working with to identify the problem of the climate change. How does the architecture has changed, but how does our lifestyle can change in this new era of, I'll say, new challenges?
I think that's exactly the kind of crucial question. Architecture doesn't necessarily change lifestyles, but it can probably offer alternatives. It can offer those who actually want to and can see different kind of ways of living, the opportunity to do so. And I think as architects, we just have to repeatedly do it again and again and hope that change will slowly establish itself. My advice to the mayor would be to think long term, to engage as many stakeholders, as it were, citizens of his city as possible, kind of to listen not just to the architect, but listen to other kind of professionals of all walks of life, and kind of try and build something up that will have a sound foundation within the population.